So welcome to the channel today. We got something special today. What we're going to do is show a oil change, actually all 3 holes on a Harley Davidson. And what I have today is I have my 2014 CVO Limited that we're going to be checking out and having it all serviced. And Adam's going to take over here and he's going to tell us what he's going to do today.
All right guys, in today's service, like Bob said, we're going to do what's commonly referred to as the 3-hole oil change. Now what that entails is changing the engine oil, the transmission oil, and the primary drive oil, as well as the engine oil filter. We're going to replace the drain plug O-rings, and we're going to seal everything up nice. Correct, so for the engine, we're going to be using the Amsoil 20W50 V-twin engine oil. And the transmission, we will be using Amsoil's transmission specific fluid. And in the primary drive, we'll be using the Amsoil primary fluid, as well as an Amsoil filter. Now, you can use 2050 in all 3 holes if you choose to. That's what Harley Davidson does in most cases. But Amsoil's gone through the extra length to engineer a product specific for each application, so you see a higher level of performance when using the system the way it's designed.
Let's go get the bike on the rack.
Sounds good. Okay. All right guys, today we're gonna be doing what's commonly referred to as a 3-hole oil change on a Harley Davidson. So we're gonna be changing the engine oil and filter, as well as the primary drive and the transmission oil, all at the same time. The first thing you wanna do is take out your drain plugs and let the oil drain. So there will be 3 separate drain plugs for the 3 separate compartments. You have one right here for the primary drive. So I'm just gonna break it loose. The one here for the engine. It faces forward towards the wheel. Then all the way over on the other side, there is a 3rd one that's up through the hole in the frame, cross member. So the tool I'm using right now is just a 5/8 socket. Now you can also use a 1/4" drive Allen wrench. The drain bolts can accommodate both tools. I used the 5/8 socket to break everything loose, but because the transmission drain plug is up in the frame, I like to use, it's a 3/8 drive socket with a 1/4" Allen on it, because it just makes it easier to reach up into the frame. Obviously make sure your drain pan is in place to catch the oil and pull that plug out. Guys, and I like to do the transmission one first, just that way it's out of your way. Then adjust your pan to where you're still catching that, but you can reach the engine plug and pull it out. And then last but not least, the primary plug. And if you have a drain pan that's big enough, it will catch all 3 streams of oil in one position. Now, one thing you want to watch out for is the engine oil is just barely trickling out. When I go open the actual dipstick, it's going to gush out. So you want to make sure that your drain pan is far enough forward to catch the stream. All right, so now that's loose. It's allowing air to go in there, and all 3 oils are now draining properly. Now I take a 3/8 ball end Allen, and I will also remove the dipstick for the transmission. Now at this point, I just let both dipsticks hang there. That way any drips from the dipsticks will go into the pan and not make a mess on your bench. So I use a little cookie sheet to catch the oil that comes out of the filter when you remove it. And while those are draining, remove your oil filter. Now the next step, we're going to take off the derby cover. These are a T27 torque spit. Now a key here is make sure your tool is firmly inserted and apply forward pressure to it as you break them loose, because sometimes these get really, really tight, and if you're not in there properly, they strip out very, very easily. Luckily, the person that did the oil change in this last time didn't over torque them. All right, so at this point, everything has been opened, everything has been drained, but it's not quite done dripping yet. So we take this opportunity, we're gonna clean up all of our drain plugs and get them ready for reinstallation. You always want to inspect them to see if there's any metal or large chunks on there, because that could be a good warning of something that's going wrong in the engine. Now the one that comes out of the primary, you're going to see a little bit of debris on there at all times. As long as it's not big chunks of metal, it is perfectly normal. Actually, that was the transmission plug. Like that. That was the the primary plug. That is perfectly normal. That is just clutch material that comes off during normal wear. Don't be alarmed by that. As long as there's not any big, shiny chunks of metal, you're good. Now, I'm very particular about the way we clean these. I actually use my fingernail with the rag and go through and clean the entire thread. You also want to inspect your O-rings. If your O-ring looks perfectly good, there is no harm in reusing it, but O-rings are also cheap, so there's no harm in just replacing it. So we're just going to replace all of these. One of these was broken, and you can see this one's kind of flattened and mushroomed out, so it's not what I would consider reusable. Install them carefully over the plugs. Make sure they're seated in place on all 3 drain plugs. Next step is I like to use a little bit of thread sealant on the threads. Doesn't take a lot, I just paint the threads a little bit. This is dual function. Not only does it help seal the threads in case of an O-ring failure, also offers a level of vibration resistance so that the drain plugs don't accidentally back out, because we all know how much a Harley likes to vibrate. As at this point, your drain plugs are ready, and it looks like most of the oil is done dripping out of the cases. So we're gonna go ahead and reinstall the oil filter. Now guys, remember when you're tightening your filter up, really only needs to be hand tight. Yeah, there's a torque spec of like 16 to 20 inch-pounds or something like that, or foot-pounds. But the big thing is just don't over tighten it. Only reason I even use the tool on it is because you can't reach in here on this particular motorcycle to get your hands on it. All right, here I'm just gonna spray down the oil residue that dripped under the filter. They do make funnels designed for this, but I'll be honest, in most cases, they don't work very well. So we just spray down with this. If you're doing it at home, you can just use warm soapy water and a garden hose. We just don't have access to that here. And this particular motorcycle is also a twin cooled motorcycle, so there is a plastic cover down here that covers the water pump. Make sure to clean that out because oil will get trapped in that cover, and then when you ride down the road later on, it'll drip out and you'll think you have a leak when you don't. All right guys, now that the filter is installed and everything's done draining, I'm gonna remove my drain pan and slide this pan back here just to catch the few drips and get this out of the way. With that large drain pan removed, just gives us more room to work here to reinstall our drain plugs. So I start with the primary first, just because it's the closest one to me. Always start it by hand, never use a tool. That way make sure you get proper thread engagement. And the one for the engine. Guys, and now that the primary drain plug and the engine drain plug are in, we're gonna come back over to the right side of the motorcycle and install the one for the transmission. Remember, this one goes up through the hole in the frame cross member. Okay, now all 3 plugs are in. They're only hand tight. We'll go ahead and get this out of the way. Okay guys, so now that everything is hand tight, we're just gonna go in and snug it all up with our ratchet. Now, drain plugs do not have to be really tight. You just wanna seat it and then give it a slight little snug. Let the O-ring and the sealant to do the job, not force. All right, and now for the transmission drain plug. Okay guys, so now that all of our drain plugs are in and torqued down, our oil filter is on, now it's time to fill it back up with oil. Now this particular motorcycle, there's a cutout here where you can actually use a funnel, but Harley makes these funnels specifically designed for the primary, and they're actually far easier to use. In this primary, we're gonna be using the Amsoil V-Twin primary fluid, and on these primaries, they're rated for 38 ounces, but that is a dry, clean primary. Every single part and piece has been taken apart and there's no oil residue. So when you're just doing a fluid change, 1 quart works just about perfect. All right guys, now over here, for your transmission fill, I like to use a long funnel just because it makes it easier to get to the hole back in there. Once again here, your capacity is just about 1 quart on a 6-speed. Now when doing the engine oil, this is technically a 4-quart system, but on a normal oil change, you're not gonna get all of the oil out of the valve train. So the refill should be right around 3.5 quarts. So that everything's full, we'll get rid of our funnels and we will double check all of our levels to make sure they're at the appropriate places. So with the transmission, just stick the dipstick in there and check it. And you can check this now before running because this level isn't going to change when it runs. And there we are, right at the full mark. And when you're tightening up the transmission dipstick, you really don't need to use the ratchet on it. Just snug it by hand, because if they get over tightened, they're very hard to remove in the future. And there is an O-ring seal on there, and that will seal enough. Gonna reinstall the engine oil dipstick. Now the primary drive doesn't actually have a dipstick to check. But you want to look and make sure that the bottom of the clutch basket, the bottom of the pressure plate just dips into the oil and comes back up. Regardless of how many ounces you think you need to put in there, the level is what's more important, because you never get all of the oil out of the primary, as we mentioned earlier. So if you look down in here, you will see where the bottom of the clutch basket just dips into the oil and comes back out. Well, it's correct. It really doesn't matter whether you put in 32 ounces or 34 ounces or 36 ounces. As long as the level is correct is really what's important. Now we'll reinstall our cover. All right, guys, I'd like to make note that on the newer style twin cams that have the silicone O-ring on the back of the derby cover, it is not necessary to replace that gasket at every oil change. Obviously, you want to inspect it and make sure that it is in good condition, but it's not necessary to replace all the time. Again, when installing the bolts, you don't want to use any force. See, I'm not using the T-handle. I'm just spinning them in with my fingers, not to damage any threads. Once all 5 bolts are seated, just give them a light snug. But the big key is just not to over tighten them. This point is where I go through my mental checklist. I make sure, double check, all right, the filter has been removed and replaced and is tightened down. All 3 drain plugs have been replaced and tightened down. All 3 compartments have been refilled with oil, that way nothing's gonna run dry. As long as you've double checked everything and in your mind you know you've done it all right, it's time to run the bike and let the system prime. When you first start the motorcycle after doing the oil change, you may hear a slight rattle for a few moments, and that is perfectly normal. Because we've removed the filter and the oil, it does introduce an air pocket into the system. Once the oil pump pushes that air pocket through, the oil light should turn off on the dash and the noise should go away. As long as it doesn't happen for more than a few seconds, there's not a problem with that. So now that the system is run, we can double check our engine oil level. Wipe the stick clean and reinsert it. There we go. We're about 2 lines below the full mark on the upright level. You'll see this dipstick has a little zigzag there. This one here is for when it's on the Jiffy stand. This one here is when the bike is upright. Because we're doing this service with the bike upright, this is the side you want to use. We're about 2 lines below, which is perfect. That'll leave room for expansion when the oil heats.
So hopefully watching the video today, it will help you guys out if you want to change your oil yourself. You can always contact Adam here, and he will sell you oil and ship it to your house and stuff like that if you'd like to do it yourself. Or at any of the rallies, you can pick him up and he'll stop by and you can come in and, just like I did today, and have your service done here. It just took, 30 to 45 minutes and they knocked it out here pretty quick.
Yeah, the nice thing about the Amsoil system is it is, in Harley Davidson, is good for 10,000 miles or 1 year, so you don't have to do multiple oil changes throughout the year, which ends up saving you a lot of money in the long run. And of course, here we do the service at a reduced price compared to your Harley Davidson dealer anyways, and you're getting a superior product.
Well, thanks for doing the service today.
My pleasure.